Okay, today we're going to be brewing a Czech Pilsner. This is a recipe I've been working on for a month or two now. This is the third version. It's pretty basic. 5 pounds of Pilsner malt, 141 grams of Carapils, all sterling. We're going for 40 IBUs, 4.6% alcohol. I'm going to be using Fermentis 3470 and fermenting it at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. We've also got a very low mineral water profile, sort of two style for the Czech Pils, and building it up from distilled using gypsum and calcium chloride, also some Irish moss and yeast nutrient in the boil. A little inspection here. This was my old mill, no longer in use. Definitely a little bit finer, but looks good. All right, strike temp of 165, 166. We're aiming for a mash temp of 158. Look at that, getting mashed in. There we go. It was a little low, and then I juiced the induction burner a little bit, and we got her up to 158 pretty shortly after mashing in. And 70 minutes. See you later. All right, it's a brew in the bag, so you know the drill. We're going to squeeze the bag. Yep, it's not an astringency producer. That's a myth. Just get better efficiency, squeeze the bag, don't sparge. That's my opinion, but you can do what you want. We're aiming for a pre-boil gravity of 1039. Now this is where things get a little bit interesting. It's a pretty cheap refractometer, and I also don't use a wort correction factor. If you're interested in learning about that, I'd go look at Brian at Short Circuited Brewers. He does a good video on what a wort correction factor is, but we ended up getting a pre-boil gravity of around just shy of 1045, I think, right around 1045, just a little bit shy. I ended up hitting my number anyway, which was supposed to be an original gravity 1045, so that clearly was off because I boiled for 30 minutes. So we're measuring out the 30-minute hop addition here. It's sterling, 7% alpha acid. Sterling's a daughter of the Saaz hop, and we'll go over that in a minute. But yeah, 21 grams of sterling. I always get a little bit of lemon zest, lemon rind, almost lemon grass, if you will. Again, it's a pretty underpowered induction burner, so that's the best boil I ever get. I'm getting a new system. Stay tuned for that. I think it's around 14 grams of sterling, 14.15 at the 15-minute mark, along with 1.3 grams of Irish moss. And my batch size is 3 gallons also, for those who are new to the channel. The hop schedule, we go 30, because it's just a 30-minute boil. Remember, 30-minute, 15-minute, and then right at flame out. So when I kill the heat after 30 minutes of boiling, I'll throw in the final addition. All sterling, all the way, about 40 IBUs. And the only other additions I do during the boil are Irish moss, and I'll add yeast nutrient as well. The reason I'm adding yeast nutrient to this beer is because there's a very, very low mineral content in the beer because it's distilled water and it's just brought up so I can get my chloride to sulfate ratio where I want it, which is about even, very light on both though. And because of that, we don't have a lot of trace minerals in this water because we're building it up from distilled. You either really want to cut a little bit of your distilled water with your tap water. The tap water is going to have some of those trace minerals like sodium and magnesium and whatnot. That's going to help and zinc maybe. That's going to help with the yeast sort of as far as nutrients is concerned. But because I'm not going to do that, I'm going to add yeast nutrient to the boil as well, and that'll make sure I get all the food that the yeast needs, sort of mineral-wise and vitamin-wise, if you will, to have a healthy ferment on distilled water. Here's the yeast nutrient that I use. I use the Y yeast beer nutrient, another 1.3-ish grams of that at 10 minutes to go, along with the chiller to sanitize that bad boy and kill the heat. There's the flame out addition right there. Just your standard good old-fashioned immersion chiller. With an immersion chiller that big and only 3 gallons of liquid, I can get this thing down in probably about 10 minutes, down to pitching temp. If you rotate your chiller around in the hot wort, it'll chill a lot faster. All right, sanitation is king. Star sand in the spray bottle. Pro tip right there. We use that in the brewery all the time. Got to make sure your ports are sanitized also. That's where the spray bottle comes in handy. All it is an acid, by the way. It's just lowering the pH just a little bit so that bacteria can't grow. And it needs contact for about a minute, technically, to work. But it's not like some crazy harsh chemical that's going to wreck your skin. It's just a bit of acid. Don't fear the trub. I don't mind it at all. There's some research out there, or some by Brewlosophy or whatever, that shows that it basically doesn't have an impact and potentially could help the yeast, so I don't sweat it. I just pour to my volume, and as long as it's not pure hop gunk and protein, I'll just throw a little bit of it in there. No problem. It saves having to filter it. It's a pain in the butt. And aeration. Aeration's key. About a minute of shaking like this. Get those legs into it. Yep, there you go. Oxygen is important at this stage in the process. All right, Saf Lager 3470. I've been impressed with it for sure. It rips through beers at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. You definitely need to make sure you let it condition for a full 14 days. You'll get a much cleaner ferment, I find, doing it that way. But your mileage may vary. And we've got a starting gravity right around 1044. So after, I don't know when this was brewed, we'll throw it up on the screen somewhere, but it's been several weeks, about a month, and now we've got the Pilsner, the Czech Pilsner. It's starting to clear up decently well. I didn't use any fining. I usually have put gelatin in it in the past, but I was really trying to dial in a flavor, so I just didn't want anything potentially messing with it. So here we go. We have a little sniffy sniff, as they say. I just get like mild fruitiness and like lager character, and like maybe a little bit too fruity, like to the style. It's not super spicy or earthy or floral. It's more like a little bit fruity and definitely a little bit of sweetness from the malt. It's cleaning up, and this is something that I've noticed, like as I've been drinking it, as it's sat for motorcycle. As it's sat. Oh. We're doing it live. As it's sat for longer, it's cleaned up more and more and more. And there's this character that with the first couple times when I brewed this, I rushed it. I fermented it and pulled it off the yeast within a week, and then put it in the fridge and cold crashed it and carbonated it up. And there was this weird, like almost tangy, fruity like sour almost sort of character to it. And I was trying to identify what it was, and I was like, you know what, it's probably just some fermentation character that needs to get cleaned up. So this time I was like, okay, we're gonna leave this puppy on the yeast. It was on the yeast for exactly 14 days. On the 15th day, I transferred it into a keg, and then it sat in the keg for another probably week until I started tasting it. And even then there was a little bit of that character, but now it's completely gone. It doesn't exist anymore. And it just, I'm one of the most impatient people in the world when it comes to beer. So with these kinds of beers, you definitely have to be aware of that. If you really, when it starts to warm up, you can really start to nitpick it, and it's there a little bit, that character. The yeast that I used was Saflager 3470, which is notorious for being able to ferment clean at warm temperatures as a lager yeast. And I think that's true, but I still think you need to give it enough time, at least in my experience, to clean up properly. If I was to do this again, I think I might play around with using Lutra, which is a Kvike yeast that people have had a lot of success doing pseudo lagers with at high temps and under pressure and stuff like that. So there might be a video about that coming on down the line. The other thing that I got nailed on this beer process-wise was before my mash temps were relatively low. Like the first one I did, this is the third iteration of this beer. The first one I did, the mash temp was like 148, and then I dialed it up to like 152, and then this one I cranked it from 152 all the way to 158 because I was having this problem where the 3470 was just absolutely cranking through the beer, like drying it out to like 1.004 or like 1.005 or something like that as far as the terminal gravity, and it was just bone dry. So any sort of character in there that was a little bit off, there was like no residual body or residual sweetness. It just came off as like a really thin beer and kind of harsh. And so I bumped that mash temp up to 158, and this finished at 1011, which is starting to get right in that range of how I would like it as far as residual sweetness. I might switch up the yeast next time. I might add a little bit more gypsum to it just to crisp it up a little bit, because it's definitely a little bit sweet, but which is nice, like I said, but it'd be nice just to get that like crispy sweet edge to it, if you know what I'm talking about. But I'd say it's the best one yet, and that's what we try to do. Try to improve every time a little bit. So I think that about wraps it up. If you have any additional questions about the beer or the process or anything in general that you saw, just throw it in the comments down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Prost.